It's a strange thing, really, how much of human life is shaped by something no one's ever seen, heard, or touched. The afterlife, heaven, hell, reincarnation, some version of what comes next. But what if there is no next? Not in a tragic horror movie way, but just nothing. Like falling asleep without dreaming, quiet, peaceful. This idea, for a lot of people, sounds terrifying, unbearable even. And it's easy to understand why. Most of us are raised to believe that death isn't the end, that there's a continuation, a reward, a reunion, maybe even a second chance. So the thought of it all just stopping, that can feel like being thrown into freefall. But maybe it's not as bleak as it sounds. Let's start with this. If there is no afterlife, then this life, the one you're living right now, is the only shot you get. That's not depressing. That's clarifying. Because it means the stakes are real. Every moment matters. Every relationship, every decision, every joy, every regret. They're all part of the one story you get to write. When you remove the idea of eternity, you start seeing the beauty in limits, in endings, in the fact that we don't last forever. See, a lot of religious systems tell us that the afterlife is where things really count, that this world is just a test, a trial, a waiting room. You suffer now, you sacrifice now, because there's a prize on the other side. But if there's no prize, no judgment, no cosmic scoreboard, then what we do here isn't about earning something later. It's about living fully now. That shift changes everything. It puts the meaning-making back in our hands. You start to realize, if you want forgiveness, you have to give it now. If you want peace, you can't wait for some eternal rest. You build it yourself, here, or not at all. Some people ask, well, then what's the point of being good? As if the only reason not to steal or kill is fear of punishment after death. But if morality only exists because we fear hell or want heaven, is it really morality, or just obedience? Most people, even without religion, still help others, still feel guilt, still try to do the right thing. That's not because they're afraid of divine consequences. It's because we are social, empathetic, thinking beings. We understand suffering. We understand love. We want to reduce pain where we see it. We don't need an afterlife to care. In fact, believing there's no second act can make you care more. Think about the people you've lost. If there's no afterlife, you'll never speak to them again. That sounds harsh, but it also means their presence here really mattered. Their absence hurts because they were real. You don't get to see them again, so you carry them with you now. You remember them. You honor them by how you live. The finality makes their memory heavier, yes, but maybe also more sacred. There's a strange kind of courage that comes from accepting the end, from knowing your time is limited, from staring into that quiet darkness, not with fear, but with a sort of calm defiance. Some people cling to the afterlife because they're afraid of death, but oddly enough, the belief can also paralyze life. You postpone things, you tolerate suffering, you stay in toxic relationships, follow oppressive rules, suppress your desires, all because the reward is later. But what if there is no later? Then freedom becomes urgent. You don't have time to live someone else's idea of a good life. You don't have time to waste being miserable in the name of what might come next. The strange thing is, this view doesn't make life feel smaller. It makes it feel bigger, heavier, more meaningful. Because when you realize there's no eternal reset button, you start paying closer attention. You start showing up to conversations, to experiences, to people. You become more present, because presence is all you have. And when you look at the world, the trees, the sky, a newborn baby, a friend's laugh, these things feel richer, not because they last forever, but because they don't. Some might say, well then, what's the meaning of life if it just ends? But maybe meaning doesn't come from duration. Maybe it comes from intensity, from depth, from the connections we form, the impact we leave, the love we give. Think of art. A song lasts a few minutes, a movie a couple of hours, a book maybe a few days. But those things can change us. They can stay with us forever, even if they themselves don't last. Maybe life is like that. Not infinite, but meaningful. Not eternal, but beautiful. Even if, maybe especially if, it ends. One of the most powerful things that happens when you remove belief in an afterlife is that you stop waiting for justice, waiting for answers, waiting for someone to rescue you from suffering. Because if this is all there is, then waiting doesn't work. You start realizing that no one's coming. And oddly enough, that can be liberating, because when you stop waiting, you start acting. You stop asking, why do bad things happen to good people? And instead ask, what can I do to make fewer bad things happen to people at all? Without the assumption of divine balance, justice becomes a human responsibility, not a cosmic guarantee. You don't leave it up to fate, you fight for it, right here, with whatever means you have. This shift puts the burden and the opportunity on us. And this is where we have to talk about death itself, because the fear of death is usually where the belief in an afterlife takes root. Not in logic, not in evidence, but in fear. It's understandable. Death is the great unknown, and unknowns scare us. But fear doesn't mean something is true. Sometimes the afterlife functions less like a belief and more like a psychological survival mechanism. It calms us. It gives us a sense of order, a sense that nothing is ever really lost, but maybe things do get lost, and maybe that makes them more precious. There's a deep kind of honesty that comes from accepting death without decoration. No golden gates, no rebirth, just the end of consciousness. The lights go out. And what's left is the imprint you made on others, the stories they tell about you, the values they carry forward, the memories that echo after you're gone. That might not be eternal, but it's real. And if you think about it, even belief in an afterlife doesn't actually protect us from grief. When someone we love dies, even if we believe they're in heaven or have reincarnated, we still miss them. We still cry. We still ache. Because grief is about presence, not just fate. And here's where things get even more complicated. The promise of an afterlife has often been used to justify terrible things. People have killed and died over it, not just in ancient times, but today. Martyrdom, suicide bombings, holy wars, all fueled by the belief that what comes next is more important than what's here now. That's one of the dangerous side effects of afterlife thinking. It can devalue the present world. It can make people reckless or cruel or indifferent. You can blow up a building if you think your reward is waiting for you in paradise. You can neglect the planet because you believe there's a better one coming after this. You can ignore suffering because you think pain here earns points somewhere else. These aren't fringe beliefs. They shape policies, they shape cultures, they shape how people vote, how they raise their kids, how they treat strangers. And all of it, every bit, built on something that's never been proven. Meanwhile, the people who do not believe in an afterlife, they have to build meaning here, they have to take care of each other, they have to confront death not with promises, but with perspective. And sometimes that creates a stronger sense of moral urgency. You see it in end-of-life care, in how some doctors and nurses talk about their work, in how people say goodbye to someone dying, not with "see you again soon," but with a deeper kind of presence, a real goodbye, a holding of the hand, a silence that means everything. It's hard, but it's also real. There's no script for how to face the end. No instructions, no second chance. That's what gives every goodbye weight. And then there's this question, if there's no afterlife, does life still have purpose? The answer is yes, but the kind of purpose changes. It's not assigned to you. It's not handed down from a god or written in a holy book. It's something you choose, something you create, which admittedly is a lot harder, but it's also more personal, more authentic. It's the difference between living a life you were told to live and living a life you actually want to live. And that's the quiet rebellion of letting go of the afterlife. You stop outsourcing meaning. You take it into your own hands. You become the author of your existence. You find purpose in your relationships, in your passions, in your struggles, in beauty, in creativity, in service, in small acts of kindness that might not echo into eternity but matter deeply in the moment. And if we're being honest, that's all we ever really have. One thing we rarely talk about is how belief in an afterlife affects self-worth. In many religions, your value isn't based on who you are, but how well you follow the rules, whether you believe the right things, whether you obey, whether you repent. It's like your life is always under review. So when you remove the idea of a divine judge, something strange happens. You stop performing. You stop living like someone's keeping score. And you start asking, what actually makes life meaningful to me? Not to a god, not to a priest, not to a tradition, but to me. That kind of self-inquiry is harder than it sounds. Because when there's no eternal validation, you have to validate yourself. You have to face who you really are, not who you're trying to be for some cosmic approval. And that's where real growth begins. See, the promise of an afterlife often comes bundled with shame, the fear of sin, the anxiety of not being good enough, the pressure to suppress certain thoughts, desires, or doubts. But if death is just the end, not a divine courtroom, then the shame starts to lose its grip. You can begin to unlearn it. You stop carrying this invisible weight that says you'll be punished for that later. You stop thinking of yourself as broken by default or guilty by nature. And instead you start focusing on the only time you actually get to live. Now, and this shift doesn't just affect individuals. It changes how societies think. Whole legal systems have been shaped by the belief that someone else, somewhere, will judge right and wrong. That we don't have to fix injustice here, because it'll all be sorted out in the end. But if there's no sorting, then we have to ask, what does fairness look like now? What does compassion look like in a world where pain doesn't get redeemed after death? What kind of systems do we want to leave for the next generation if this is the only life they and we will ever get? That's not nihilism, that's responsibility. It's not about despair, it's about realism. Because if you know this is the only earth you'll ever walk on, you're more likely to protect it. If this is the only version of your loved ones you'll ever see, you're more likely to cherish them. If this is the only chance you'll ever get to be yourself, you stop waiting to become someone else. You stop waiting altogether. And that's maybe the biggest gift of all, the end of waiting. You stop postponing joy. You stop postponing courage. You stop postponing difficult conversations. You stop putting off forgiveness or taking risks or telling people how you really feel, because no one's watching from above and nothing's guaranteed after. So you act now. You love now. You become, or at least try to become, the kind of person you want to be, not because someone says you should, but because you can. And that brings us to a deeper layer, mental health. For some people, belief in an afterlife brings comfort. But for others, especially those who struggle with guilt, anxiety, or obsessive thinking, it can make things worse. It can feel like you're never clean enough, never worthy enough, never safe, like even your thoughts could send you to torment. That's not peace. That's fear in disguise. On the other hand, people who let go of afterlife beliefs often describe a strange kind of clarity, like the floor falls away and then nothing. And then, slowly, something else starts to rise up. Freedom, not the freedom to do anything you want without consequence, but the freedom to stop pretending, to stop performing, to stop fearing that your next thought could doom you forever. You begin to build your life not on the promise of eternity, but on the reality of now. And there's something humble about that, grounded, honest. You realize you're not eternal, you're not chosen, you're not destined. You're just here, and that's enough. You find peace not by escaping death, but by understanding life. Not by postponing purpose, but by creating it. Not by fearing judgment, but by showing up for the people around you, listening, being kind, admitting when you're wrong, trying to leave the world a little better than you found it, not because you'll be rewarded, but because someone else is here with you, living their one and only life, too. There's a quiet truth that starts to sink in once you fully let go of the afterlife. You begin to understand that the only kind of immortality that exists is legacy. Not in a grand historical way, not in fame or statues or books with your name on them, but in the tiny, invisible threads you leave behind, the things you say that someone remembers later, the way you made someone feel that still lingers, the lessons you pass down without even realizing it. And if you've ever sat at someone's funeral and heard the stories, the little details people remember, you know what I'm talking about. It's never about what the person believed about heaven or hell. It's about how they showed up when it counted, how they laughed, what they taught, the time they listened, the time they stayed. And those things, though small, ripple outward. They shape how others live. That's what you leave behind. And it doesn't need to be eternal to matter. In fact, the idea that something must be eternal to be meaningful is kind of strange when you really stop to think about it. We don't ask a song to last forever. We don't expect a sunset to stay in the sky. We don't measure love by how long it lasts, but how deeply it moves us. Why should life be any different? Yes, it ends, but that's what gives it shape. That's what makes decisions matter. That's what turns ordinary days into sacred ones. Because you don't get 100 versions of this day, you only get one. And that awareness, that finiteness, can break your heart. But it can also open it. It makes you pay attention. You start noticing things, the warmth of someone's hand, the sound of laughter through a wall, the weird comfort of silence with someone who understands you, the first sip of coffee on a cold morning, the last words of a hard conversation. These things, they're fleeting, but they're real. And if you live like they're all you get, something strange happens. You stop waiting for miracles. You start noticing them. Not supernatural ones, not lightning bolts or divine interventions, but the kind of everyday moments that, for a second, make you forget the chaos and just breathe. It's not nothing. And it's not despair. It's a kind of reverence, not for what comes after, but for what's here now. And look, no one knows for sure what happens after we die. Maybe it's lights out, maybe it's something else entirely. But if we live as if this is all we get, we tend to live better. Because you're not bargaining anymore, you're not hedging your bets, and you're just here trying to love well, trying to be kind, trying to leave something that matters. Knowing that this story does in fact end, and because it ends, it matters. A life without an afterlife doesn't mean less meaning. It means the meaning is up to us. Well, that's not terrifying. That's powerful. And if you're willing to let go of the promise of forever, you might find something even more sacred. The urgency of now, the honesty of presence, the freedom to choose what your life stands for, and the chance to live it all with your eyes open.